All
and you
right,
can just move this out
perfect.
of the screen there. Yeah.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So we're going to start in the AWS Management Console. From here, we can access any service available to AWS using the search bar, whether that be what we're going to be using, Amplify, or an associate service that we will need to potentially go over, which are the IAM roles. These IAM roles, policies, users, etc., are just ways for the services to access resources within your AWS account. We will not go into them in detail for now until later on in the tutorial, where we will need to cover roles and services being able to access your Amplify application, as that will be necessary in order for there to be a backend, I believe. So, first things first, we want to set our region to Canada Central. It is okay to have it on US East, West, anywhere else. Ideally, we have Canada as our region set because this will ensure that we have quickest connection times to our actual hosted instance, and also because this ensures it's within Canada, keeps things local. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. I would just prefer to use Canada Central as we are in Canada and it is helpful. Also, US East went down the other day and there was a big wipe. I don't think Canada Central goes down at all, but I digress. From here, once we've chosen our region, we will go into the AWS Amplify app. Now this, I've already created a demo, so while you guys use Central, I'm gonna just hop into a fresh region I have not used Amplify with, and you will see that it will not store the services that I've used in other regions. So for right now, it believes that I've never used AWS Amplify. It will start me from the beginning, and I'll have to go through every step of the process to get started. So from here, we're going to scroll all the way down and get to Amplify Hosting. With hosting, we can host from GitHub any existing code that we already have, and then make it easy to deploy code from GitHub to our application seamlessly. It essentially acts like a pipeline for us. So we want to select GitHub. It's going to open up the github.com login. It's going to ask for authorization. You do want to authorize it. Won't do anything too bad to your GitHub. It'll just ask for read permissions and it'll be all fine. So I already have some repositories available and created, but we're going to ignore those for now, and I'm going to start from scratch, and we are going to just say that currently I've just allowed it to read my repositories, and let's just say it's empty. So I have an empty GitHub, and now AWS is able to read my GitHub repos. So how am I going to get an app into GitHub and then onto Amplify? The easiest way to do that, provided that we do have the installed packages, Npm, there will be an available command to use ourselves. So npx create react app is a command that is very powerful for getting started. It provides you a React app template that will be created instantly. You want to name it whatever you want. So for purposes of this demo, it's going to be Amplify Demo. However, you can insert any text you want on the third argument or second argument. This will be the name of the app that's created. So I'm going to run this command. It's going to install all the necessary packages and everything it needs in order to get this running. Honestly, for the most part of this workshop, the thing that will take the longest are these Npm Install commands as it tries to fetch all the packages it needs and get all prepared with the necessary infrastructure. So just make sure that these messages are popping up. If npx is not installed, chances are you haven't installed npm correctly, maybe a very old version of npm, not sure. But at this point there should not be any issues. Here we see some of the packages being installed. It's initializing a Git repository for itself, which we will have to overwrite. But here we go. It's been successfully created. And now we can see that if we go into Visual Studio Code, and we just want to open that folder there, we can see that we have a bunch of files, a whole node modules, some public assets that will be used. But let's just test the application real quick, make sure it works, just so we know that locally nothing's broken, no issues. Perfect, there we go. We see that the command worked. We have a working application started. So we know that this application works locally, and we know that our Amplify service has connection to our GitHub. So now the next step is to get this on our GitHub so that we can upload it to our Amplify instance. So to do that, provided we have Git installed, we are going to, I believe we want to now it says it already has a Git connection in here. I'm wondering, all right, let's just do Git init. All right, let's see. All right, I think it was. Where did I say? Git remove. Hold on. I think it's git remote remove. Gotta check these commands again. All right. All right, there's no remote origin. So what we're gonna do then is go into our GitHub, and we're going to open up a new repository. For now, I'm going to make it private and say, all right, let's call it Amplify. Just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to make it private just to make sure no confusion is there. So we have our GitHub repository created. We are going to essentially just copy paste this command line here, this command line code. Going to just plop it right into Visual Studio. It will run each of those commands, add a README. It's going to add that README to the actual program. It's going to commit the changes we've made, create a new branch, and then add the remote origin that is going to be this repository. Then once we push our change, it is going to now update the code base for our repository here. So if we refresh, we see that all the files and application data from this React app is now on our GitHub repository. Now that we have the repo set up and we have AWS ready to read, we will just refresh this list. It's going to see the Amplify repo that we just created. It's going to ask which branch we want to actually display. Since we only have the one branch, we're going to select main and click next. Now for the build settings, app name, feel free to choose whatever you like. But for the build settings, we're going to set it up. It does have some, I want to say, just predeterministic ways in order to kind of predict what build settings you want. However, I find that these end up being not enough for what we will be needing to do. So ideally, we just copy paste what is in the Word document and just put it in the, excuse me, we put in the build commands. These commands, starting off with the backend list of commands. So during build phase, we are going to execute amplify push. This command, although not relevant now, will be necessary once we get our backend established. Amplify push will essentially make a connection from the application in build time to the backend, providing the necessary credentials required in order to actually make a connection to the API. If we do not have this, we would then have to basically post our API key in a repository, which then would be accessible from basically anybody who accesses the site. So for the sake of security, this is the best way in order to kind of generate your API keys at build time and keep things simple. Pre-build npm install, as with any React or really any npm or package.json based application. This will install all necessary packages. Running build will create an artifact that will essentially encapsulate what the application is and allow Amplify to deploy this application to any user who wants to access the website. The artifacts will be stored under the build directory. Files will be stored anywhere, and the cache is in node modules, which is essentially all the packages and where it is trying to reference when it tries to seek packages for this application. So once we have all,
Sorry, I had a question about the backend phase.
Yes.
So you said that the command just like sort of creates an API. Is that right? Like the amplify push simple?
It doesn't create an API. However, it does generate the credentials necessary. It establishes the connection, and that's why I want to talk about it a little bit later. Okay. Because it'll make sense once we get to it, because it'll create a singular file which will have all the necessary information, and we'll go from there. I'm noticing though that it's not actually recording my desktop audio, so I'm just going to see if I can just you know what, I don't know if that's too necessary right now, but we'll cover that. Basically, just for later notice, anyone who's watching, the question was just asked, does Amplify Push create an API? It does not. We'll go over what it does later on in the tutorial.
One more question would be, is that how does it know where to look? Like for the backend, how are we giving it directions to where to like essentially find the backend? Or is that a wrong question?
Okay, so the question was how does it know where to find the backend and what are the directions to get to the backend? So the backend is established through API keys. Essentially, we're not setting up there's no backend directory, if that makes sense. There aren't files essentially that we have in the application that are associated to be the backend. All the backend really means, for the purpose of this application and Amplify, is the connection it makes to the AWS data store database, or Cognito, or any other of the services. Essentially, all the backend in this instance does is provide the links necessary to say, oh, okay, this is where I need to connect to. if I make a call to the backend, I'm just running this API call. We're just providing it with the API calls and not the calls, the credentials in order for it to make API calls. So we're providing it the ability to do, post, get, puts, and deletes. If that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, going down. We shouldn't need to mess with any advanced settings. We can save specific API keys and whatnot, but for now, we shouldn't need to worry about any of this. There may be an error later on where during build time, if there is an issue with the version of Amplify CLI, the command line interface, we will have to go over that, but hopefully no issues. We won't touch this, but just be aware we may have to return to some build settings if issues do arise. So from here, it'll just clarify everything you've selected. We save and deploy. So currently, my Amplify app is being created. It will take a couple more seconds here. And there we go. It's been created, and now this is where we can see the pipeline process that Amplify has baked in and available to anybody with an account. So the multiple steps, we can actually look into it as it goes. First, it wants to provision the build environment with the Docker image based in their servers. Essentially, we're not going to worry about too much of the code that's being run here since we do not really have control over it, from what I believe, as everything is being installed on their end. But during build, this is where it starts to actually use the build settings that we have actually implemented. Now, there may be an error that pops up here because we do not have a backend established. However, what we will see at this stage, if anything happens. However, all I did here was clone the actual repository itself. We can see the command lines that actually show up and what the actual process has been during the cloning. And here we can see that it is starting the build phase, and it has run, although it's not exactly visible here. This is where it's run Amplify push, and it's attempting to connect to the database, finding the actual Amplify app ID, figure out all these different things. And it looks like everything has been going good. Hopefully you've been creating your own app up until this point and following along with the workshop so that you can tell me right now if there are any issues or if there are any pauses in the build process. But for now, while this is building, we're just going to go get started on the backend environment. I just want to make sure, is everybody up to speed and okay here? Cameron and Joel, everything good?
For me, I'm still downloading the npx because it's taking forever.
Okay. Did you do are you installing Node.js?
No. I have npm and npx, but it's just downloading like the initial stuff.
Okay.
All of that packages.
Okay. How about you, Cameron? How are things on your end? Oh, is Cameron here? Yeah. Oh, and Jeff and Sam, how's it going? All right. Everyone's going to stay muted. No worries. But hopefully everything has been clear so far, because now we have just built our first application that is now publicly available. So now, currently, this website is publicly facing. And I'm just going to hop into Discord right now, and I'm going to post it in the resources channel. I encourage each of you to just click that link, as that is my current and publicly available React app or Amplify app that I've just created. It can be accessed by anybody on any anyone connected to the internet, and this was pretty much done in about 15 minutes, give or take. And given that this was a very quick process just to get just a simple app on the internet, this is very good for quick development of any kind of personal websites or any kind of I want to say smaller websites that you don't really need a huge framework or too much infrastructure for security or development, things like that. This is just very quick and dynamic. So looking here, we can see that all of our commands during our build settings, the commands that we identified in our build settings have successfully run, and we can see the exact command line responses that we received during these commands in the that were run during build time. So nothing seems to be the issue here. However, it will mention if an error pops up, and there will be a little icon on the left here kind of indicating what is an error message. So just be on the lookout for that. We will not be covering tests in this workshop, however, potentially in a future one. They are available for Amplify deployments. Unfortunately, though, we will not be covering it currently. However, they are available. Then it just deploys the build that we have created for this application, and it just verifies what the site looks like. We've disabled screenshots, or they have for the time being, but essentially these screenshots are just a mini preview of what the index would look like, or what the main splash page of your website would look like. It gives you some metadata about when it started, build duration, the commit message, everything like that, even the repository that's connected to. But here we have our application, and now we're going to start looking at I want to see what I have next on the agenda here, actually. Okay, so currently, so there is one thing that may cause issues, which is the lack of a service rule. Now, I don't want to get into this if it's not necessary, but if any of you have booted up your Amplify instance, or have tried to deploy it and there are any issues, something potentially about not being able to access any resources from your AWS account or anything like that, most likely it has something to do with a service role not being designated for your application. Now, I believe this is one I had to create, so we will go over it real quick, just in case there are any issues, and just to make sure all of our bases are covered. So really, it's just a 3-step process. It knows that we're using an AWS service, so we're just going to choose the Amplify service. It's going to know that we want to use it for backend deployment. So we're going to click Next. It's going to ask for administrator access. We're going to click Next. And then role name, we're going to call it AWS Backend, or whatever we want to call it. It just allows us to access Amplify, or it allows Amplify to access AWS resources on our behalf. It'll give us all the different permissions and the trusted entities. These essentially are just declaring what, on a more technical note, it is just declaring essentially what services this role can access, provided that this service role is provided to any service that you have initialized. So again, it's really just giving the app admin rights. So once this role is created, it will be in your list of created roles. Here we see AWS backend was created. We will not be using that since I already have Amplify console backend role. And I believe it may be a default role, but just in case there's any issues there, that may be one thing that fixes any sort of issues you may be having with deploying your app. So again, I just want to check, Cameron and Joel, are there any issues, or are we able to move on to the next phase of the workshop?
For me, at least, personally, I am now in the step of like hosting it, or not hosting it, I should say, deploying it.
Okay.
In Amplify, and I'm just waiting for all the confirmations. It's just all the loading time is building up slowly.
Yes, loading times do take a while, and that is mainly what takes so long with this entire process. Cameron, are you still with us?
I am indeed.
Okay. Are you building the app along with the tutorial, or are you just kind of listening along? Because I want to make sure if you are following along that if you have any issues, we address them now, because we're going to need to be moving forward.
I'm just paying attention.
Okay, you're just paying attention? Sounds good.
Yep.
All right. So from here, all right. So Joel, currently you have no issues. We will move on to, I guess the next immediate step would be running the command npm install -g at AWS Amplify CLI or /CLI in any terminal at any location. This will just install the latest version of the command line Amplify commands that we will need in order to connect our application to our Amplify backend. So it'll just allow us to run like command line commands like amplify push or amplify pull, things like that. And I guess now at this point, we can kind of choose what we want to do next. So up to either you guys, but we can either start by looking at the database part of things, or we can look at the security part of things. Either or, we are going to get to both, hopefully. But security will essentially, we're just going to set up a quick login page with some quick code that just kind of determines, is an admin logging in or is it just somebody else? Whereas with the database tutorial, we will go over initializing the backend database, getting comfortable with getting and deleting in data store, and just kind of having it dynamically update on the application. So is there a preferred, I want to say, is there a preferred aspect we want to cover first?
For me, I want to start with databases, but that's just
Okay.
personal preference.
Hey, you're here, so unless Cameron, you have anything else to say, we will start with database.
It's all good. Take it in your direction.
Perfect. So going from here, we are going to set up the Amplify Studio. So as we can see on the main Amplify page, all we have to do is click Backend Environments, and it's going to prompt us to set up the Amplify Studio. Simply at a press of a button, it will enable the user-friendly backend experience for your Amplify application. It will take a couple seconds, so just give it a moment here. Perfect. So
I did have a weird question.
sure thing. What's up?
For the URL, right? Like when you have the app sort of released for the URL, is there an option to actually like
Change the domain?
Yes.
There is.
Okay.
So we can talk about that a little bit. So right here, we have the ability for domain management. However, of course, there are going to be... this talks about Amazon Route 53, which is not necessary, as I believe you can connect... you can connect to any domain registered on a third-party provider, like GoDaddy, what are the other URL... any other third-party... I'm just use GoDaddy for my own, but I actually have an application. I'm just going to quickly dox myself real quick. So for this website, I have set up my own custom domain that I've had to buy the domain and had to connect it myself. However, you are able to set up your own unique domains if necessary. So that is an option, but we will not be covering it. Not sure why it is giving me this error. Don't know what that's related to. Anyways, it will not concern us for now, since we will now launch into the backend studio. Just going to open a new browser or a new tab and get it all set up here. And from here, it's going to showcase a lot of the things to do next and just some, I'm going to call it, recommended next steps. But for our purposes, we're going to focus on getting the data model set up. So for the sake of this being a simple grocery list, we're going to just create a new model. This is very reminiscent of if you've taken any database course, just a simple schema that we just add whatever fields, any relationships, and any names that we want to a given entity or given model for the sake of this this exact infrastructure. So entities are called models. We need to name our models. Every model has a field, and models can have relationships with other models. So for the sake of this tutorial, we will call it our grocery model, which will have a description. Actually, let's say it has a name. There's the name of the grocery and the quantity of groceries available. We will define the types as string and integer. Otherwise, we can set it both to string, set it to a lot of provided, I'm going to say field types. However, there are custom types that we can create or enumerables. However, for the sake of the tutorial, we won't be going over that for now. We have our two fields, and we have a very basic data model currently. So at this stage, we're going to save and deploy. It's just checking to make sure nothing's going to conflict with the data model that's being deployed. So this is going to take a couple minutes. While this is essentially in the oven, we are going to get started on getting our application to be, I'm going to call it, compatible with the backend here. So, you know what? I don't need the entire demo here. I need just a couple files. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to take the database file. I'm going to take the index file, and I'm going to take, where's the last file I said I need? Package.json. So, in your base, let's call it Amplify Demo files. From here, we are going to take all these files, which is essentially everything that you'll need to copy over just to quickly get set up. I'm going to just plop this in the resources. Essentially, these files will provide you some just really quick, I'm going to say, framework code to get started with any of these, to make your, with any of these services, to get your application up and running. So I'll show how this would work. I'm just going to drag and drop package.json. I'm going to bring login into my source folder. I'm going to move database into my source folder, and I'm going to replace index.js. I'm going to just do an npm install real quick, just refresh all those package.json libraries that are necessary. And we are going to, what's going on here? Rename. These aren't really too, all right, it's possible that, it's probably open in another file or folder or something here. I don't see why it would be. Let's take a look here. All right, I just ran it again. There's no issues. Not sure what's up with that. No matter. We're just going to try running the application again. Just make sure it, actually, this should not work. Mainly because we have not actually gone over some of what these, this new code that I've just inserted is. So, before we actually get into running this, we have to go over what this new code is actually expecting. Mainly, right here is the key to connecting to your backend instance. So if your code has red underlining under Amplify Core, which I don't think it should, as it does have AWS Amplify installed here. But if it does, just feel free to copy paste and just do npm install that package, and it should just install it, no issues. However, these I'm going to say these lines essentially configure your application to connect to your Amplify backend. However, you may notice that there's a file here that it is looking for that is currently not present in any directory in our application. To resolve this, we need to actually now connect our application to our backend using the amplify command line command. So now that our deployment has been successful, we can actually generate the necessary files needed in order to connect to our backend. So taking, going up to where it says deployment successful, click for next steps, it's going to suggest that we put this code into a terminal that is currently pointed at our base directory for the application. So at this point, we're just going to copy paste that in. And now it's going to identify the entire application that we are currently trying to connect to our backend. And it's going to run some automatic checks and logins and verify, are you actually trying to log in? Is this you? It's found, so real quick, it's found the Amplify app itself. It's found our backend environment. And now it's actually detecting our default editor. So it knows we're using Visual Studio Code. It knows we're in JavaScript, it knows we're in React, and it knows the source, build, script build, run script start. It just kind of automatically detects that stuff. Very powerful, very neat. And once this command has been run, it actually now generates all the necessary files it needs to know what to expect in the backend. So we're just going to say we're not planning to modify the backend, but we can see here, let's first look at models. We can see that the files that were pulled from or generated from the backend are GraphQL schemas, which I'm not going to get into what they are, how they work, especially. I'm just going to point out that the schemas generated are based off of the actual models that we have created in our backend. Now we actually have generated what is existent on the Amplify backend in our local application. So now when we interact or we want to access these attributes, we have local instances of these models that we can work with. We have the objects in our possession. We don't have to arbitrarily create it ourselves and have all these errors with the backend. Aside from that, we do have an Amplify, I'm going to say folder here. Not really we won't really be looking into this much. I haven't really used it. It does have some information about your Amplify information, like what region you're hosting this in, what is the role that you're using for authorizing your Amplify app ID. Not really useful, so we won't really be worried about that. The second file that we are going to be worried about, though, is the AWS-exports.js. So this is going to answer your previous question, Joel, of why do we need to run Amplify push. Essentially, Amplify push will generate this file for our application during build time on AWS Amplify. These endpoints and API keys and information are essential for us to actually connect to the backend, because this endpoint is secret information, I'm going to say. This should not be publicly accessible, nor should this API key be publicly accessible. However, they are necessary in order for us to actually connect, make changes. It really just gives us admin permissions to do whatever we want with the database. Any deletes, gets, puts, posts, anything like that. So we need to generate this exports file every time we build the application on the server. Now, as we can see here, it automatically ignores this file if you try to upload it. It asks you not to edit it, as you should not, because this should not be posted on any repository. It shouldn't be accessible to anybody. And if you put it on your repository and then upload your application to Amplify, it will be basically, I'll just kind of word it like this. If you go into sources and then you just kind of go into static. Here, let me actually run the actual app right now. Hopefully I don't think I'll get any issues. Perfect. I won't worry about this too much right now, but we can see that really all of our files are available here, especially what is in source. And what's worrying is that AWS Exports.js is visible and accessible from here. However, this is only because we are locally deploying it. On our actual server, if we go to our instance, it's not going to be completely clear yet. However, we will see that things are a lot more abstracted on here. Well, once we get to the point where we upload this to the Amplify application, we will not be able to see AWS Exports.js, essentially. If we upload this repository as it is, this is publicly accessible, anybody can see it, and that is a very big security risk that you run. So that is why we need to run Amplify push at build time, and why we can't just upload this to a repository. So, moving on from that, we are able to access our AWS exports file, and using this AWS exports, we configure the Amplify object that is available from AWS Amplify Core that is going to allow us to connect to our backend. So, we've configured our Amplify properly. Everything here has been set up. And now from here in React, we are essentially importing the database object from the database file and displaying what's on it. So what's in the database file? Give me 1 second while I take a drink. In this file, we can see that we import the data store object from AWS Amplify Data Store. We import our grocery object from models, and we're importing React because we've got to use a state just for completeness sake. However, we will see here 2 main commands that we're using for querying the database. These 2 commands are datastore.query and datastore.delete. This is our get and delete commands that will be used just to do a very simple get and delete. So if you want to query the entire list of a certain object in your database, all you simply need to do is just type in datastore.query, then the object itself. This will then look in the database for any of that kind of object or model, retrieve any matching model, and then present it back as a, I'm going to call it a list of models. It returns in an array, doesn't return as a JSON or anything, just a list of models. We will take a look at that once we actually get some data in the database. We have also defined a function, delete grocery. This function also uses datastore.query. However, there's more, we can get into this more later as well. However, with querying, we can add a conditional. And that conditional is defined by putting a comma right after your, so if you do query grocery, you put a comma to signify the second argument. Second argument is going to be your conditional, I'm going to call it function. Because here we define C as being the parameter of the model, we're defining the model predicate of grocery. The model predicate is essentially just a reference to grocery. It is just going to encapsulate, okay, what are we trying to do with, what are we trying to look for in the grocery object? So we are able to define the attribute name, and we're able to ask, okay, is name for every grocery object, check the name of that grocery object. Then within this 2-argument function, we ask, is that name equal to the variable that we're providing called name? Maybe I should name it something else just to, let's call it delete name. Just for the sake of clarifying. That's not the same thing. This is what we're passing into the function. So for every grocery object that we're querying, is the name equal to the delete name that we're providing? This will then retrieve every single one of those models that follow that condition, store it in whatever variable that we provide it, and then return, similar to what the query did here, just a list of all the applicable models that follow this condition. Once we do that, all we have to do is run datastore.delete with the model we want to delete, and it will perform it, and we will see if it has been successfully deleted or not. So for the sake of this tutorial, I've just made it very simple, basic kind of table, name and quantity, and then once we actually fetch the list of the groceries from the back end, we just populate the table with the name, quantity, and then a button just to delete the actual grocery itself, if we so choose. Now, to get that working, we actually have to add data to our database. So here, if we go back to the Amplify Studio backend, we want to go to Manage now and click Content. So from here, we can actually now visually...
I had a question.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Go right ahead.
So most of the database here is made of JavaScript, right? If I'm not mistaken? Or all of it, I should say.
Sorry, the one that so this is just more like database testing, but
Okay.
I've created this application in JavaScript, yes.
So when you're creating the tables, right? Right now you are creating the table or the SQL databases or whatever the database is using like this Amplify Studio, right?
Yes.
So if we were to if we have like, say for instance, Postgres code, or we have developed like a Postgres database separate in AWS, can we connect that into this, if that makes sense?
So with AWS, there is Amazon S3 that you can connect to and set up. I believe if you're using Postgres and SQL with Amazon S3, yes, you can connect it to this Amplify instance. That is adjacent. Yes, that is an Amazon S3 service that can be used. However, I find that using Datastore is a lot more lightweight for what we want to do, at least for this tutorial. But yes, you can implement those. You can implement those changes because you can then connect it to Amazon S3, and then S3 can connect to your instance. So yes, that is allowed. We will not be covering it in this workshop, as that would be its own long explanation of how to get that set up. However,
one last thing would be right now I'm not stuck, but I have launched my app and I have done everything, but how do I connect like the Amplify Studio settings or Studio to my actual like VS Code, or is that the wrong question?
Okay, so I did cover that a little bit earlier, but we can go over it again. So now that you have your deployment set up, so if you see where I'm at in Amplify Studio, we're going to navigate to the top right here in the local setup instructions, and we're going to see that it says pull. We're going to look at the command line code that says pull the latest into your source code. We're going to click the icon here. It's going to copy it to our clipboard, and then from the base directory of our VS Code, we're just going to paste that in there, and then we're just going to hit enter, and it is going to automatically generate the files and connect our instance. Or I'm not going to say it connects our instance, but it provides the credentials necessary for our instance to connect to our backend. So think of it as this just requesting the information. It's just requesting the passwords it needs if it wants to get in. So let me know once you've run that, since that is necessary before I keep moving forward.
For some reason, I cannot find that local one that you just said.
Okay. So are you on Amplify Studio?
I'm in Amplifying Studio setup, I guess. Are those two different things, I'm presuming?
What does it say on your screen?
Amplify Studio,
On
as
the
in,
top left?
yes.
Like, does it look like my screen kind of deal?
It is loading, I guess. Again, I'm just refreshing it.
All right, once it loads and displays, let me know.
Okay, it looks like exactly like yours.
Okay, so then at the top right, it should say local setup instructions.
Oh, yes, I got it. Thank you.
There you go. And then you want to take that code, paste it right into VS Code, and then it should automatically handle it from there. So moving forward from there, we are going to add some data into our database on the data store instance that we're running. So going into content, we see that no groceries are able to display. We can create our own grocery specifically. So if we create lettuce and we say there's a quantity of 2, we can just save it right there. Boom, it's in our database. No real other issues there. Personally, I just like how quick and easy it is just to add and remove any instance from here, and we can visually see the database any time, filter and search, and actually you are able to download, kind of act as your own backup, but you're able to download any results from your database and just have it stored on like an Excel file. So this is useful, again, if you need to save up any backups, then use that Excel file to repopulate your Amplify instance to save it locally as opposed to having it all on Amplify's servers, or if you want to kind of store it anywhere else. However, we are going to auto-generate some data. We're just going to auto-generate, let's say, 5 data points of just random letters and numbers. These themselves can be deleted if necessary from this page. However, we want to work with them in our application. So we see on our localhost that right now it's actually not running, so we need to boot it up again locally. And here, as we already see, our database entries are present in our local application. This is because we've provided it with the API keys necessary for our application to connect to our backend database. So we see that all the entries are one-to-one, and it has successfully and properly fetched all that data. Now, looking in the console, we can see some, we don't want to worry about that because that is just me being lazy with coding. However, we can see that the way that the data is retrieved in a datastore.query request is by containing every single model object within an array, a large array. So if you would want to access any specific instance and work with them in any meaningful way, let's say you want to fetch one of the models. Let's say you want to fetch the second or third model and then, check what its name is for any sort of reason. Then that is easily accomplished by, again, calling the object, accessing that array, or accessing that index in the array, going from there. But we can see all the data that is stored within this model, name, quantity, created at, ID, updated at, etc. Now that we actually have this displayed, we are going to test deleting one of these entries. Now, since I didn't do any, I don't actually update the, the actual state, so it's not going to refresh the page automatically. However, it will successfully delete it in the backend when I click one of these buttons. So let's start with lettuce. Let's get rid of lettuce. So we've alerted the page, grocery successfully deleted. We're going to refresh this page. Lettuce is now gone. However, we see, what's up here? Why is it not gone? Oh, there it goes. So another thing to note about Amplify Studio's content screen is that it updates in real time. So any changes that would be made that you were trying to make on your end to the database are going to be present on the screen immediately. Typically, refreshing the page is not recommended or necessary. However, there may be some issues if you try to open a second instance of Amplify Studio at the same time. So we can see here that currently there doesn't seem to be... Oh, here we go. So here we can see one of the issues that happens. Now, I'm not sure if the console brings it up. However, if you try to have... maybe it has to do with user pool, maybe it has to do with 400. That's all complicated speak. Essentially, if you notice that you're stuck on this screen, chances are you have another instance of Amplify Studio open on your computer. Just one of the little things to watch out for. All it's going to do is just perpetually load because it only wants to have one instance really running at any given time. So just make sure you only have a single instance so Amplify doesn't get mad at you. See, there we go, all good. Going from here, we can just delete anything we want. Grocery successfully deleted. We'll refresh our page. It reflects immediately on the Studio page, and we are good to go. Now, that covers the get and delete requests that are available. Doing the putting and the putting and posting will be explained further if we have some more time. However, this is just a very quick, simple baseline explanation of get and delete. So far, any questions or anything like that? Joel, Cameron, everything good? Okay, I'm gonna. What's up?
Go ahead, Cameron.
I just said all good so far.
Okay, perfect. Joel.
Yes. So this is like me being lazy, but is there a way to actually, like, say for instance, I have like a code that gets data or some sort of like getting data mechanism? Is there a way to actually populate the database using some sort of external code base or a code for it?
Yes. So I've implemented something like that on one of my projects where essentially, I guess I can show it off real quick. It's not really, this is for a client, but it shouldn't be. If you manage to get on the site anyways, you can see this. But essentially, I'm just going to talk about the backup real quick. With this backup, essentially, what you can do is really, even on your local application, set up some method for the database to be populated with put requests. Essentially, just save every time and just put a new, like let's say grocery list or grocery item, or have it auto-generate. Actually, if you want to be even lazier, what I did earlier was Amplify Studio allows you to auto-generate seed data. So do you want 100 groceries just generated like that? There you go. You know, so it's very, it works very quickly in terms of if you want to just dump a lot of data on there. So a combination of, if you want specific data from a specific source, you will potentially have to code that yourself. However, if you just want dumb data just for the purposes of testing, I don't know, stress testing your actual your application and what it's able to store, you can do that as well. So let's actually open up VS Code again. However, yes, so the code I demonstrated was able to work with using an Excel document or the CSV file that you can download as a backup, and it's also able to work with, I'm going to open, let's open up, where am I here? Amplify demo. It's able to work with one or the other. So if we just run this up, we'll see we have all of our entries on our page here. So if we can just, any other questions, Joel, or did that answer your questions?
That did answer my question. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to take one quick break just for a second here. I will be right back, but just give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, and we can hop right back into things. So, just make sure the recording's still going. Yes, it is. All right. So, we're almost near the end here. We are now going to cover the security side of things. So, we've already set up our database for the application. So we've already kind of covered about the first couple steps here. Now we're going to go to set up authentication, and we're going to check out how to get it so that to get into our website, you will require a login. So first off, it's just going to ask you to configure your login and configure your sign-up attributes. For this instance, we're just going to keep things to, we're going to remove email login and just make it a username login. We're going to keep multi-factor authentication off. We're not going to add any other login mechanisms. And to set up, to configure our signing up, all we're going to just require to sign up for the current site is a username. And the password protection settings, although you should require, again, all these different things, for the purpose of the demo, just to make things simple, we're going to turn all that off. So this is a very simple, easy way to set up your authentication backend now. So think of it as just making up of these two main attributes, logging in and signing up. From here, we can now just deploy what options we've selected. Not really too much of a complicated aspect here, but we're just going to confirm that we're deploying this service here. It will take a few minutes. Then, while that's being set up, we're going to go take a look at our code again. So in order to get the login page up and running, we're just going to head back to index and type login. It's going to swap what our application is looking at now for our index page. And we're just going to see here that now we're actually importing different things. Completely unrelated to data store, Auth is a separate service that essentially stores authentication data in, I'm going to call it, encrypted payloads that we are able to access using the library, or I guess the object itself. With Auth, it is actually baked into a couple of React, I'm going to call them components that are able to be used in order to populate a page. So the functions we have here currently are getting the currently signed in user. So once you're logged in into the system, you are able to actually retrieve user data and see how essentially the different attributes of that user. So what I'm actually going to put in here is a console log, so we can take a look at what makes up a user object for the authentication service. Looking at verify login, we can see that we're going to be passing it a authentication state change that will be given, which will be passed by the Amplify Authenticator component. These components kind of make up I'm going to say, really the login box that AWS Cognito kind of just has baked in if you want to just use it. So to have the most flexibility with this library, it would be definitely recommended to use Auth Container with Authenticator, two different things. And then you're able to define your own sign in and sign out components themselves. You can provide them their own specific styles. They have their own properties. If we actually take a look in this component here, let's see if we can actually make anything of it. Nope, not from here. There's documentation on it specifically, but they do have their own properties and things that they pass back, such as handle auth state change, which is essentially a property that is going to trigger every time, essentially, if you're going to be logged in, logged out, signing in, signing out, things like that. Going into the authentication.
Hey, sorry to interrupt real quick.
Sure thing.
I need to dip, so I just want to say thanks for putting this together, and take care, guys.
No worries. Take care, Cameron. Hope to see you later. All right. Let's keep moving forward here. All right. So, still deploying. Now it's done. Perfect. So with the authentication deployed, we can actually now create users for our app. It's got to refresh again. So in order to create a user, we're going to just create a quick temp mail just to kind of have a temporary person to just set things up. So we're going to just call this person test. We're going to contact them using email. What is our email going to be? It's going to be this email. Post it there, and we're going to have the password just be something not too complicated to input. So from here we can see that the user is required to force change their password next time they log in. This is a status that can be edited, I believe, so that they are you're able to just essentially control what the user experiences once they try to sign in. So are they required to have multi-factor authentication? You can turn that on. What's their current account status? I believe you can change that. So we've actually received an email from the AWS service notifying us of our username and password. Now, in the authentication setup page here, I believe we are able to actually alter what some of the messages are and say what is actually put in those emails. However, I believe that's only for forgotten passwords. I'm not sure about the initial the initial temporary password. But we have our username, we have our password. Perfect. Now if we go back to our application, we can see that our authentication box has been initialized and is very much usable. We can reset our password if we have a username. We can sign in, provided we actually put in credentials. So let's try putting in our credentials. That will totally work and no errors will pop up. Oh, what's that? An authentication has appeared. Okay, authentication error has appeared. So what is the issue? The issue here is that we have not actually pulled the latest authentication data from our app. And that is something to keep aware of at all times when working with AWS Amplify, is that any changes you make to the backend are not going to be immediately updated to your local application. They will only be updated provided you run the command amplify pull. So think of it as a repo of services that you constantly need to pull from the backend into your local application. This will be required anytime you make a change, any sort of update, anything like that, as without it, you will inevitably end up having errors and issues prop up that may just be resolved by just doing a quick pull. Okay, so we've done our Amplify pull. Let's head back into the local application and try running it again. Now, when we run it again, we should expect totally no errors of any sort to pop up. And I say that facetiously because we are going to encounter another error this time, right after we change our password. So we're going to change our password to something new, but we see that the authentication has been properly imported into our project. Once we change the password, we're going to receive an error. That error is going to be cannot read properties of undefined. So what is this talking about? Well, for the sake of this little demo, we can see in the Cognito user group that what we're trying to access here, let's see if we can access what we want. So from our result, we are trying to access sign-in user session, which exists here. We're then trying to access the access token, which exists there. We're trying to access now the payload. Now we are looking for the Cognito groups attribute within this payload. However, this attribute does not exist. Now, the reason that it does not exist is because we have not actually initialized any cognito groups for this user. That is an issue because without any groups, this fails and it just returns undefined, keeping it ideally hard to read for anybody trying to sign in with an invalid account. So now that but we are signed in. We are signed in, however, the error had cropped up. So we're going to just sign out. We have successfully exited. We need to head back to our users. Oh, do I have another page open? Yes, I do. Let's go check it out. We're going to go back to user management. We're going to go back in here. We see that the account status is confirmed, but we do not have any groups yet. So we want to create a group. For this app, let's name the group, let's just say family. We are a family member, or let's just call it main user. This is the main user group who are going to be using this application. So we go back to our user here. We're going to go check its group membership. We need to add this user to a group. We're going to add it to the main user group. It is now a member of this cognito group. And now if we go back to our application, we're going to refresh the page just to make sure. We're going to try logging in again, and we're going to be met with no visible errors. We have signed in successfully. However, we're going to see that in the actual code itself, we want to get this special message only for admins of the actual page itself. So we have signed in successfully as a separate user. No issues have arisen. However, let's say we want to be, okay, understood. Let's say we want to have a special privilege for admins only. Well, how do we do that? Just like we did before, instead of doing main user, we are going to, we're going to go into creating groups in the authentication, I believe. Oh, here we go, groups. We're going to create a group. We're going to call it admin. We're going to create that group. We're going to go back to our user here, and we're going to add that user to the admin group. So now looking back on our app, we're going to refresh just for good measure. We're going to do test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, signing in, and now we get our special admin only message of hello. That is a way to differentiate between having an admin versus a regular user access the site. If we check the console, we can go back to the sign-in user session, the access token, and the payload, and we can see here that there is an attribute called cognito groups. One of the groups that we are in is admin. Now let's say we are both an admin and a main user. What do we expect to happen given this code? Well, since we say group.includes admin, it is just checking that we are a part of the admin group. It does not require that we are only an admin and a part of no other group incognito. So if we try to sign in again, we will get our hello message, yet we are both an admin and a main user. So you can essentially have these multiple, let's call it multi-group authentications for each of these users. That allows us to be part and have access to many different group-specific attributes of your website. However, allows you to still maintain admin status if needed. This is a very clean way of just getting this set up for your backend. So I think that about covers it for the authentication. Now, we have all this set up for our app. Now, from here, we're just going to stop running it, save all this. We are going to name it the, let's call it application push. We're going to stage all of our changes. We're going to commit all the different changes we've made, and we're going to push this from our repo from our Visual Studio Code to our GitHub repo. If we check in on it right now, we will see that application push, everything is there. Now let me go check my Amplify project to see if I need to do anything myself on this side. Oh, we can see that I don't need to do anything, because what Amplify does automatically is that with every commit you push to your GitHub repo, it will automatically try to provision, build, and deploy your application at every step of the way. Of course, if you want a separate testing repo just for, current in development features, you'd have to create a separate branch. However, if you want to create just a very streamlined, lightweight application, just get your changes up, make some hot fixes right away, Amplify's got you covered. As we can see, it's building it currently, and ideally no issues will take place, cloning the repository, doing all that fun stuff. And once it's done, we will see our full application on the public web in its full glory. Unfortunately, we do not, because something happened connecting to the repo. That is odd. What is going on here? Reconnect repository. Well, while that bug tries to sort itself out, I will go to my other demo that has already successfully been, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to look, hey, look, we did it. We successfully built and deployed our application. So if we go on the main website, we can see that everything is there available to the public from this application. So that concludes the main, I'm going to say, guided workshop segment. We do have some spare time left for questions and overview of what a complete grocery list website would look like. So, actually, if I can just, what happened here? All right. Well, I'm going to run this locally instead from running it online, and then we can take questions and the like. So, and who is in the call currently? It is Joel. Joel,
Hi.
What questions do you have?
Well, so when, or not when, I should say, for authentication purposes, right?
Yep.
Is there a way for like the authenticator, or say for instance, there's a group called like backend editors or database managers or something like that, where that person can log in and be able to like control not control, sorry, edit some like data or push and pull some kind of data. Is that possible? I don't know if it is.
Yes. So really what you would do then is you would basically just have those push and pulls hidden behind the different, I'm gonna say hidden behind the different groups. So like we were going over in VS Code. So the main application itself, I don't believe Data Store has specific, I'm going to call it differentiations, I'm going to say locks for certain groups. Data Store itself, I have not seen that is able to lock anything. But for this instance, let's say admin. Let's say we only wanted every time someone logged in with an admin, data store queried. Query, grocery. And let's just say it did that. Really, what you would do in order to hide these different buttons and things would just to be have these data store requirements hidden behind certain group pools. So you would, at any time, can get the current authenticated user, get their cognito group, and provided that they are in a given group, you can then attribute them the I'm going to say permissions or the code that enables whatever query you want, whether it be deleting, actual get, post, put, anything you want. So yes, you would just have to code it as such. But again, so behind an if statement, behind routing your actual website to only route to an admin page, if you are an admin, things like that, it would be up to you. But I don't know if data store itself is able to say, really, you could just code it yourself, really, just say, again, data store would just essentially you check the authentication service anyways and say, are you an authenticated user who is in this group? If you are, perform the query, right? So you can just kind of put that behind an if statement, put it behind a state change, anything you like.
Okay.
All right. Anything else aside from that?
At least for the time being, no. Oh, right. This one is included under the free tier thing, right? But how do I know what the limit is of me being like, hey, I'm going to host 500 websites?
Right. So free tier is explained, I believe, in the billing section for your AWS. Let me check here. Amplify. So I believe there is an explanation right here of, let's go check grocery list and let's go check or is it here? If we go to Billing Management Console, we can check out our Cost Explorer, everything 0. And here we can actually see the top free tier services by usage. So we can see exactly how many gigabytes we are permitted under free tier or free usage tier. So we know exactly that we are allowed 5 gigabytes of storage. We are allowed 30 gigabytes of Elastic Compute Cloud, basically a month, or GBMO. We are able to serve up 15 gigabytes of requests, and we're able to do 20K GET requests of Amazon S3, and do have 5 gigabytes of Amazon S3 standard storage. So really, that is the main ones that are being used here. This gives you free usage tier under the billing service, billing and cost management console. But from here, yeah, it just tells you all the free tier limits that you have, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, any other questions? Because otherwise, I think I'm just going to wrap things up then and say, if anybody else would like to have any questions or need any clarifications on this whole workshop, feel free to contact me on the Brock CSC Discord and shoot me a message, anything about this. And especially if you have any sort of qualms with how this workshop was run and you believe you can run it better yourself, please visit brockcsc.ca/signup. This will be posted in the resources channel as well. It is recommended that anyone who wants to be an executive signs up today, because we are going to be accepting applications and performing interviews in the next week or so. So if you want to be an executive, run your own workshops, be a part of the CSC community, feel free to sign up. It is free to join, and we will get back to you as soon as possible on that. Aside from that, I hope that everybody listening has a wonderful rest of their day, and feel free to contact me with any questions you have about this workshop or Amplify or anything else that is concerning you with this workshop. Anyways, take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.